Hey, Jordan, welcome to the podcast. It's good to have you.
Hey, Angela, really happy to be here.
And I'm really excited for our conversation today. You and I have had a chance to work together kind of in real time, which it makes this, I think, a natural conversation because some of the work we've been doing has been in the neuroscience space, but from different angles. Me coming in and working with you and your team on leadership, and you kind of working in the space of neuroscience on a day-to-day basis as far as
Yeah.
the research and the science and the insights behind it. So tell us who you are, what you do, and the impact you're looking to make on the world.
Yeah, thanks. So, Jordan Zezza, I'm currently working in data science portfolio management. So I lead, basically what that means is I lead a team of a couple of project managers that really partner with, computational neuroscientists and, neuroscience strategists that are kind of leading data science efforts in how we impact the neuroscience pipeline. And so, we really partner with them to kind of organize their project plans and make sure that we're really making an impact along the pipeline with data science. So we sort of bucket our work into strategy, operations, and project management. And it's been that's kind of the space that I've played in for my pretty much entire career. So I've worked. I'm in pharma now, and
Mhm.
kind of we'll talk about the impact in a little bit, but I've kind of worked across the healthcare spectrum. So when I, entered the workforce, I entered at an integrated payer provider system. And so had the opportunity to work in spaces like hospital operations and data science at an insurance company and, worked for a post-acute care management company. And then I did some work in finance actually, which was a little bit drier part of my career. And, hopefully for any of my finance colleagues that may hear this, we'll take that lightheartedly. But, it was, I've had a very wide range of experiences across healthcare. And so, that's, I studied neuroscience in undergrad, as, we talked about. And, I'm not a neuroscientist. I did go and get a master's degree in management and organizational leadership. So, kind of look to blend my STEM background and my passion for neuroscience with a business degree, and how we can figure out how to make a really broad impact with neuroscience. And that kind of takes me to my why. So just like most people who are in healthcare that I've spoken to and really kind of stick in healthcare their entire career, they have a personal tie to it. So my grandmother was diagnosed and passed away from Alzheimer's disease, and so that was kind of my motivation for studying neuroscience going into it. And I did, want to take that PhD uh, career route. And, I got some advice from professors that, if you really want to make a niche and broad impact, they kind of just professed to me that I have the skill set to kind of maybe go a business route and just kind of take this, more of a unique path, I guess you can say. And so, I have seen more and more of this trend in recent years, but, at the time I didn't really know of a lot of people that would study a science, in undergrad and then kind of go more towards a business master's degree. But I did do that. And, I kind of feel like I came full circle here, and now I'm kind of working on a neuroscience team, and I'm kind of the business person among PhDs, if you will. And I really enjoy working with people that are, way smarter than me. I'm not afraid to say that, but I'm happy to be kind of the person that, brings them together in a way and lead a team that helps us, get organized and, make sure that we're really making an impact in the space. So my why goes back to my family and wanting to really have an impact on patients, and families that have gone through those, really tough experiences with really all diseases. But I'm happy to be focused in neuroscience, and yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. And thank you for
Yeah,
sharing that story. It's
absolutely.
profound and, I'm sure it guides your work every day as you're working with these scientists on the brain and how we can make quality of life better for everyone. And, we also think about this in a similar way, like you said, from a business perspective. So,
Mhm.
my background's in industrial organizational psychology, which is kind of this like merging of STEM sciences, data, research, but also the application of that within organizations and business. So I feel like we're kindred spirits in that way, where we have kind of this dual brain approach to the work. So one of the things I would love to talk more about, just at a basic level, I want to eventually talk about human centered design, which I think is a really great merging of both of our areas of expertise. But when we think about neuroscience and work, what are some things that we should be thinking about as far as the impact we're making to people within the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and we'll kind of get to this with human centered design, but I think a lot of well, I'll just go back and say, I'm not necessarily a neuroscientist, so I do want to obviously, say that, and from a psychological standpoint, I'm not necessarily a psychologist, but what I can say in terms of the neuroscience of the workplace and kind of getting to the human centered design piece of it, one of the things that I was taught very early on in my career is around the topic of psychological safety in the workplace and
Mm-hmm.
really creating a team environment where people are can feel free to speak their minds, and that's the way really that innovation can thrive. And so I think creating that psychologically safe workplace is really really important. And I think we kind of work together on starting to create that for a team that was newly formed. And I've kind of been a part of. I've had the luxury in my career. I started. The reason I was able to list all those different functions I was a part of was I was in a rotational program to kind of start my career. And so I've had the luxury of seeing a number of different teams and a number of different leaders, both high performing and I've worked with people that have had lower performing teams and have had kind of not so great leaders. And the really clear line of delineation between a good leader and maybe a not so good leader is the leader that can create a psychologically safe space,
Mm-hmm.
and feel that when we do kind of speak up and we're able to kind of propose ideas that might be against the grain or might be some of the more difficult conversations, I would say that those leaders then act on those and kind of empower the employees to then say, you know, hey, I'm speaking up, and then I see a change as a result of that. And so, I think, along those lines with psychological safety, we get to that radical candor. And so when you create that psychological safety, and you can create that sort of radical candor within your team, and really that's how you kind of progress more quickly through the teaming life cycle of forming, storming, norming,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of going along that life cycle. So I think from a neuroscience standpoint and a psychology standpoint, creating that psychologically safe space where leaders and team members feel that they can speak candidly, and they're they can kind of provide that radical candor.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really good place to be with a team. So thankfully we kind of have that where I'm at now, so it's good.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah, and psychological safety. I mean, it's as you know, with some of the work that we've done, it's really grounded in how how the brain actually works, how humans work through collective goals together, and some of the very basic, I don't know, primal consistencies that we all are faced with within the workplace that can make an environment a place where people are forced to be in survival mode, or they're thriving and contributing to the goals. So this is how we get to human centered design, I think, because people, I think, oftentimes think about the design of the work and not necessarily the humans that are doing the work. So tell us a little bit more about what human centered design is and your perspective on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I maybe should have mentioned in my intro. So I'm a certified practitioner of human centered design. So I do want
Mm,
to, throw that out there that I've been certified as a practitioner, but I'm not necessarily an expert, but I
mm,
feel that I do use it enough in my day-to-day work, and try to use some of the practices in place where maybe they're not typically used. And so,
Mm.
excited to kind of, talk about that a little bit more. But human-centered design is essentially a, problem-solving technique, or an approach, where you're essentially putting the human at the center of what you're doing, and really the human experience. So what you feel, what you see, what you taste, touch, and you're kind of putting that, like I said, the human experience at what you're doing. And typically human centered design is used in things like product development or process improvement. And I'm part of what I'm trying to do is just think about how we bring human centered design into places where people are not so familiar with it. So right now I work in R&D and data science, and
Mm.
oftentimes, you know obviously when we're running clinical trials, and we're doing drug development, or just in healthcare in general, if we're developing a program, for patients in need, or developing a program for an unmet need,
Mhm.
you're obviously thinking about the patients. But particularly in a space like data science, we talk about patients all the time, whether it's at the payer, whether it's in pharma, wherever that data science function might live. But realistically, they're kind of behind a number. And so bringing
Mm.
that human centered design to some of the things that we do, and into our day to day work, will kind of bring to light kind of the human experience. One of the examples, I do want to tell a little example of human centered
Yeah.
design that I think is, it's not necessarily focused in the workplace, but I think it highlights the essence of what human centered design is, and kind of how it can be different than typical process improvement,
Mhm.
for example. So, and I do want to credit a coworker, a previous coworker, that had told me this story. But there was essentially a large airport. I think it was the Houston airport, and basically what was happening is they were having poor customer experience scores on their surveys, and the
Mm.
root cause of that was they were waiting really long for their baggage claim. So from the time that they were exiting the aircraft, and then they were waiting at baggage claim, it was, let's just say, it was
Mm.
20 minutes or so. And so, the solution that the airport executives essentially came up with was, let's bring in a Lean Six Sigma process improvement, group of consultants that can help us kind of improve our throughput rate and process, and we'll get the bags to the customers faster. And so they did that. Let's say they cut it in half. It was reduced from 20 minutes to maybe 10 minutes. And so they anticipated seeing a significant improvement in scores. And the next quarter, when they did the customer experience scores, you can probably infer they didn't really see
Mm.
much of an improvement. So then what they did was they kind of brought in a group of human centered design consultants. And what they did was, there's a framework in human centered design called the double diamond, and we can talk about that a little bit. But the first thing they do is they really hone in on what is it that you're solving for, what is the real
Mm.
thing that you're solving for. And when you look at that, it was customer experience. It was that human experience of waiting. And
Mhm.
so essentially, after their analyses, and what they were looking at in terms of the process, they weren't looking at improving the rates of how fast the bag can get to the baggage claim, but they were looking at the humans physically waiting in that space. And so what they actually did was they built a small extension onto the airport, and they rerouted the customers from, when they got off the aircraft, instead of taking 2 or 3 minutes to get to baggage claim, they routed them so it took 10 minutes or so. So by the time they got there, the bags were already there. And sure
Mm.
enough, the next quarter, they saw the customer experience scores, and they skyrocketed. So I think that story there, highlights the essence of human centered design, because you're not solving for a process or a throughput rate, or this, trying to add more people to unload the bags, or increase the rate at which the conveyor belts are moving. What you're doing is solving for the actual human experience. And we know in many cases for large corporations, when you're looking at when you're looking at your customers, it's that's obviously tied to the bottom line. And then when you're looking at your employees internally, and their
Mhm.
their kind of experience, that's also tied to the bottom line as well. So I know that story doesn't necessarily focus in the workplace, but I think it highlights the essence of what human-centered design is and how it's a little bit different than, your typical problem solving approach.
Yeah, no, I love that example because it does highlight the fact that, you're talking about, first of all, thinking about the end goal. What are we trying to solve for? And also you're, being considerate of the people you're serving. You're not serving the process.
Yeah.
When it comes to customer experience and employee experience, you're serving people and humans. And what are some parts of the human condition that can be frustrating or barriers to delighting that group, or getting that group what they need? Baggage is one thing, but that could also be, a working group or a team or how they're functioning. And so, what are some of the tools, I guess? Because I've seen some. I mean, human centered design is kind of a philosophy, but there's also a
Yeah.
set of tools, just like Lean Six Sigma. What are some of
Yes.
the things that are important to consider?
Yeah, I would say in terms of, in terms of tangible resources, for listeners who are more interested in getting into human centered design, Mural is a great tool that's aligned to human centered design. Mural is a virtual whiteboard essentially, but it comes with a bunch of
Mm.
different frameworks that kind of outline, human centered design, and so that's one of my favorite things to leverage. So I would say that's sort of a tangible tool. And another good resource to learn more about human-centered design and design thinking is there's a website called designkit.org. And it's a free website that outlines, different methods for, human-centered design. So, in terms of the tools, I think the broad framework that human-centered design kind of operates within is that double diamond approach. And, you
Mm.
can Google it. If you just Google double diamond human-centered design, you'll kind of find a bunch of different articles on it. And basically, what it is the approach is, if you can imagine the first diamond being the problem space, right? And then the
Mm.
second diamond is more of the solution space, is what they call it. And so when you're sort of in the first diamond for the problem space, what you're doing is you're kind of cascading and trying to understand what the problem is, and that phase is really the discover phase, right? So you're trying to understand what is the what's the problem that we're actually solving for. And so kind of going back to that
Mm.
example of the airport, you'd really be looking at the human experience. And so some tools that you might use there are frameworks for interviewing or shadowing or customer experience mapping. And a lot of that is kind of somewhat desk research, but then also kind of taking into account some of the experiences if you kind of jump into the process and start asking questions.
Mm.
The second piece of that is kind of the define phase, where you're more so defining the actual problem. So at first you're kind of casting a wide net, and then you're looking to actually define the specific problem. And so, what you can do there is leverage customer experience mapping, for example. And this is
Mm.
actually the process of, you know, looking at what a customer or what a person is going through in a particular, with whatever framework you're using, and you're trying to map exactly what their experience is. And it's not just from a, like you said, we're not serving the process, we're serving the person. So what are
Mm.
they seeing? What are they feeling? What are they hearing? What are they tasting, touching, whatever that might be? What is that person experiencing?
Mm.
And that can kind of get you to the specific problem that you want to solve. The second piece of that diamond, when you start to get into the solutioning space, you sort of, once again, you cast that wide net. So we're casting, and then we're honing in, and now we're casting a wide net again.
Mm.
And we're developing, we might be developing an actual solution to a problem. So whether that would be a process or a product or a way of working. And some of the tools you can use, there's a bunch of different frameworks for this, but one of the tools that I like to use there is what's called a minimum viable product,
Mm. Mm.
or an MVP. And so really you look for, what is the minimum kind of components necessary for this strategy to work, for this framework to work, for this process to work. And you kind of can map those out to try to understand, like we said, what are the minimum things that we need to get this to work. And then the last thing is really the delivery of this. And so that's kind of where you're executing on what you've developed. And that's where, you might use some tools like interviews or surveys or different things like that. But once again, they're not necessarily focused on, you know, quantifiable metrics in a way. It's more so you're trying to assess the fluffy stuff in a way,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're trying to assess the human experience, the things that are tougher to quantify. And like I said, there's a lot of different methods if you kind of go to those different resources. Too many for me to name at once, but there's a lot
Yeah.
of different methods and approaches to kind of doing some of those things when you want to approach a problem using that double diamond framework.
Yeah, one of my favorite tools is the use of personas or
Yeah.
avatars, and that really provides you with a multi-layered, dimensional perspective because we are diverse people, right? And even with that baggage claim example, you may have different personas. You may have the person who is in a rush and needs to get home. You may have the person who has a little bit of extra time. You may have the person who just got off a flight and is, going through something. There's so many ways to kind of break down personas to understand how can you create options and choices for people during that experience. And that's one of my favorite tools when it comes to diversity inclusion perspective too, from a employee experience perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think where we start to use human centered design too in a more unique kind of
Mm-hmm.
a place where it's not a process improvement or not like a product development. Like I mentioned, one of the things that is kind of a pillar that I've kind of carved out for my team is under we kind of have our strategy, operations, and project management. But within strategy, one of our strategic pillars is the people and culture, right? Like how do we create a team with this? We have a newly created function. Data science is this really hot topic in pretty much any industry. We use data science and AI to do, pretty much everything. And so all these new teams are forming, and you know, really, I think what we want to make sure that we build is a team that's worth joining, and a team that people want to stay a part of.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of work, and it's like I said, this has been kind of the busiest month of my career so far, right? And it's we have to realize too that you know these an organization, like you talk about a lot on the podcast, right? An organization isn't just an institution, or a team just isn't this functional unit, right? It's a group of people, right? And that's kind of the way that we want to look at it. And so that's why
Mm-hmm.
we've kind of called out and instilled this, like, people and culture. We're a small team of 10 or 13 people or so. It's a smaller team, but when other people are looking from the outside in, what do we want to be known as? And then when we
Mm-hmm.
look at ourselves, what do we want to be known for? And so, we're kind of using human centered design frameworks and approaches to trying to create that. And it's hard because it's really hard to just write that down in a sentence or in a couple of sentences, but human centered design kind of forces us to, and it helps us kind of create, like, what is the internal identity that we want, and what is the brand we want to create to be known for. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of a key pillar in our strategy that's definitely grounded in human centered design, and once again trying to bring that to places where it hasn't always been used,
Mm-hmm.
and at least not that I've seen so far in my shorter career, I would say. So yeah.
Well, I have to ask because you're working with data scientists, neuroscientists,
Sure.
very logical thinkers when it comes to these things. What are some tactics as a leader, as a integrator of human centered design? How do you get people to adopt this who may
Yeah.
look at it as the fuzzy stuff, or maybe not as data driven as they would like?
Yeah, actually, I think it's a little bit easier than you might think,
Okay.
because I actually, from my experience, I kind of went in thinking one thing, and that was that, yeah, these people are very quantitatively driven, and it's kind of a, this causes that, or we're saying this is statistically significant because of
Hmm.
X, Y, and Z. And so, yes, I kind of thought maybe some of the fluffier stuff would be a little bit more difficult or more challenging to kind of adopt. But what I actually found is when we started to introduce human-centered design and tools like mural and virtual whiteboards, virtual collaboration spaces, and we started to talk about things that were a little bit more fluffy and idea generation, and kind of trying to create a funnel where we ask a bunch of provocative questions that will get a bunch of ideas out there, and then we funnel them down to a really great action plan
Hmm.
for a particular topic, like a data science initiative, or something like people and culture, and communications and things like that. What I found is they really enjoy it. Like one of the things I like to do when I facilitate a human-centered design focused exercise is, you know, it always kind of prompts you to start with a check-in. So
Mm.
how are people doing? How are people feeling? And I'll never forget the very first kind of HCD focused session that I did with the current team. I remember there was a few people that were like, "Oh, we feel," you could put an emoji next to your name, and they were like, "Oh, we feel tired, and we're kind of still waking up. It was earlier in the morning." And then we had a little checkout at the end of our, we kind of did a little brainstorming activity, and things like
Mm.
that. And we had a little like kind of checkout session where there was like a gif of like Will Ferrell doing the like this versus someone kind of like slumped over. Like, how do you feel? Should we, use more of this type of technique and tool, going forward? And almost everyone was like, yeah, we need this. We need more of this. This is the stuff we need to talk about. And, I think, when we worked with you, I think you saw that too, where, people weren't afraid to speak their mind. People weren't afraid to speak up, and people want to talk about culture and workplace satisfaction, and, the really kind of the fluffy stuff that sometimes goes unnoticed or is tough to quantify.
Mm.
But it's really important to everyone, and including data scientists who are actually really, really passionate about it. So, I was pleasantly surprised that it was pretty easy to integrate, honestly, because
Hmm.
people wanted to use it, and now we've used it a ton. So it's been great. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know we call it fluffy and these
Yeah.
soft skills, but I always say they are the hardest of all of the skills because you're really working with, sure, there's concepts, there's tools, there's frameworks that we know from a psychology, sociology, anthropology, neuroscience, like all of these disciplines mixed into one around what really drives human behavior. And there's
Hmm.
research, right? There's data behind these things. These are not actions or frameworks that are just random. They focus on how humans actually learn, which is social learning. They focus on what motivates humans, things like autonomy and empowerment and having a sense of purpose. These are all things that are researched. So I think sometimes people do. I mean, yes, we don't have this kind of one-to-one significant correlation. There's never really a correlation with the work that we do, but we do know some of the concepts or factors that drive certain behavior. And it's kind of a flywheel, right? There's a lot of different factors that can be built in. Um, so yeah, I'm glad to hear that your team really took the bull by the horns, and I witnessed that when working with your team, and it was really refreshing because again, I just look at this team in particular that you're working with and the impact that they're going to make on this the the condition of neuroscience and the products and the services and the um, really the cures in some cases when it comes to the brain, which is
Hmm.
absolutely phenomenal that you and I both had a hand in some of that and
Yeah.
is really really fulfilling for me at least.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the team, and like I said, the team really enjoyed that session, and all the feedback that I would get is we need more of this. We need to talk about
Mm-hmm.
this more. We need to, make sure. And like we said, I think I've experienced a lot of radical candor in
Mm-hmm.
our day to day, right? And so I think we have a team that's really passionate about people and culture, and it's been I know you've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but
Mm-hmm.
being in the virtual world, we're starting to get back to work, but even so, the team that I'm on, we're so decentralized. We have people over in Europe, we have people scattered throughout the United States. So even if we do go back to this kind of in the office, model, it'll still be relatively virtual for us because we
Mm-hmm.
are a very decentralized team. And I think one thing that I've noticed just from the pandemic is I came from a team that was so centered on culture. I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
talked about it nonstop and what type of culture they wanted to build, and we talked a lot about professional development. There was multiple team members that were dedicated specifically to culture and onboarding and just making sure that people had that psychological safety. And it was really awesome. It was really awesome to see, and see a team that's been experienced with doing that, right, for a very long time. And then, you kind of come to a team that's newly formed. There was like 3 or 4 people that have been around for a long time. And then, most of us were new from outside of the organization. And so it was really tough to kind of build a culture in a virtual world. And it still is tough to do that, right? Because we're not kind of, we talk about what do you hear, see, feel, taste, touch, like,
Mm-hmm.
you're really only seeing and hearing those people, but not even in the same room. Right. And
Right.
so
Mm-hmm.
it is, it's definitely tough to kind of build a culture in a virtual world. And I know you've talked about that a lot, but
Mm-hmm.
I think what's helped us is this human-centered design, frameworks and tools and technologies that support, that kind of problem-solving approach to not just a process, but to people and culture and how we kind of communicate and interact and what we want to be known for and all that good stuff. So, um, yeah,
Yeah, I think it takes a whole nother level of human centered design to think about this in the context of a distributed workforce, because working virtually works, but it takes a whole different leadership style and uh, ways of doing things and getting to similar outcomes that you just have to be intentional about, which is what I think human centered design is really all about. It's really about focusing on, again, the experience, the tools, the frameworks that help us get to outcomes that equal things like a more inclusive culture, better performance, psychological safety, all those things that we mentioned before. Um,
absolutely. Absolutely.
so, just to tie the bow on this topic, because I feel like we could certainly go in many different directions, but I first and foremost appreciate this conversation because a lot of guests we have wonderful guests who are making, kind of big contributions in the areas of, workplace, human centered design. And it's also good to hear, like, from a leadership perspective, just the like very specific application of what this means for a team. So someone who's in the trenches, someone who is working with a team on improving and moving some of these concepts forward. So is there any last thoughts or anything else that you want to provide the audience for people who are thinking about introducing human-centered design with their teams, that could be helpful?
Yeah, I think I think we obviously covered a lot. I mean, hopefully, hopefully the kind of message that I wanted to convey today is that, you know, human-centered design is not just for the applications that are being leveraged in a, for an Apple product or for,
Right.
for an iPhone product or something, right? Or a
Mm-hmm.
process. Human-centered design can be used in different places, and it kind of just it takes some creativity to see kind of where that could take place. But I would encourage people to kind of go to the resources that I named earlier, that designkit.org, and check out Luma Institute. They're a big human-centered design focused organization. And, like I said, Mural is a really great tool to just start exploring some of the frameworks. And they do a really great job of kind of outlining how you can start to facilitate, some of these sessions and leveraging some of the tools. And then you could kind of get into the combining of different things and really start to even innovate with what human-centered design can look like and what you can use it for. So I would say there's probably a wide variety of applications for it. And I would say that it's just so critical, to create that human-centered workforce, like you've
Mm-hmm.
talked about so much. It's just so critical to create that human-centered workforce, because at the end of the day, it is people driving this change, and not these large institutions. It's
Yes.
people on the ground and in the trenches doing it. So I would say take the leap, look for human-centered design, and you know I would say check it out and see if it's applicable in your organization. I'm sure it is.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll include some of the links that you mentioned here so that people could check
Great.
out some tools. Again, there's a variety of tools that you can start to incorporate. But I think the first step is the mindset shift
Hmm.
on how we're approaching the work from a human centered perspective. That is, just utilizing the tools is not helpful. You actually have to have the mindset shift to go along with it. So, Jordan, I really appreciate your time and sharing your perspective. And I just love how you've kind of brought together some of your experience and how you're leveraging that within your team. So thank you for sharing.
Thanks for having me on, Angela.